What's going on, guys? My name is Joe Graves, and this is Mastering Business Growth. Running a business can either be amazing or an absolute nightmare. So on this show, I speak with people who are killing it in business, and I find out what it really takes to succeed. If you think you'd be a good guest, then drop me an email at joe@innersound.media. Enjoy the episode. Today, I'm speaking with Andy Cheetham, founder of Lime Licensing Group. Thanks for coming on.
Nice to be here.
I'm wondering, why do so many companies choose to scale through franchising?
It's a big question to answer, but I think...
We've got time.
Yeah, good, yeah. Well, I think there's something that's always amazed me about franchising, because unlike any other business, it's not like you're selling more of your product or you're finding more similar types of customers. When you become a franchisor, you're opening up a whole new department in the business, really, because you're no longer... Let's say you're a widget retailer. You're not selling widgets anymore. You're now selling franchises, and those franchisees will sell widgets. And it's an amazing thing that all franchise companies, when they launch, we see in a large percentage of the time that the franchising activities is more profitable than the actual core business ever was. So even though they're sort of still in the same business, it's no longer the profit they're making on the widgets. They're making more profit on selling franchises and the royalty that they get off those franchises. So it's like a whole new business, really. And I think once companies have grasped that, it's not a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. No business is, but it's definitely a fact that most franchise companies are making more money than the actual core business they're originally based upon.
As a layman who, I get the concept, as we're a podcast production company, tell me how we might franchise what we're doing in a way that I maybe wouldn't have understood.
Well, you can franchise anything at the end of the day. It's just whether it's going to be a good franchise or not, I suppose. So,
absolutely.
From your point of view, I suppose the easiest way probably for any business to think about franchising is really much about almost cloning yourself, replicating what you're doing. So we're here in York. Let's say you moved to Plymouth. You've moved lock, stock and barrel, and you're in Plymouth. How would you start again in Plymouth? Well, you'd take all the lessons that you've learned here, wouldn't you? And you'd reach out to customers, but you wouldn't go through the evolution anymore. You wouldn't be making the same mistakes again. You've already made those mistakes, and now you're replicating what worked here, but now you're doing it in another location. And fundamentally, that's what you would teach a franchisee to do. So your challenge is to make sure the franchisee's got the right skill set, and maybe that they can work as hard as you did, but you're there to give them the sort of elements that are in an established business, even though they're a startup. So it's all about cloning and replication, really.
So if you get a client and, they're thinking, well, what's the point? Why not just do it again myself? What can you offer that people need when they can't just clone what they're already doing?
Well, I think if you think what you know about your business now, and everything you've had to go through to learn that, it's no different really with a franchise specialist. There are fundamental things that franchisors get wrong, who are inexperienced. Sometimes they get lucky and they get everything right and wing it, but for the most part, they don't really know exactly how to really nail a great franchise system, how to set up a franchise department and where those franchisees are going to come from and who signs what, who pays what and at what amounts. And that's what a franchise specialist brings along, really. It's a consultative role where we can sit with them and say, well, this is your business model and this is how you will coexist with your franchise partners. Because it's no good you getting really rich. You might like the idea of that, but if you're getting really rich and your franchisees therefore are not doing so well because the costs are too high, then it's not going to work. But similarly, if your franchisees are getting too rich at the expense of the franchisor, then it's not going to work either, is it? So it's this balance, really. You have to find this balance, and we do that through a lot of illustrative sort of profit and loss and a lot of scenario building with our clients so that balance is right and it works for both parties.
Have you seen people mess it up royally by just jumping in and trying to duplicate it themselves?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example?
I probably shouldn't name a brand name, should I? Really?
No, of course not.
But I think I remember. I don't know why I remember this one, but I do remember this one. There was an eBay dropship company, and they came into the UK from overseas, and they made a very big splash with a big sort of stand at the shows and things like that. And I remember at the time thinking, well, wouldn't you just sell your own stuff on eBay? Why would you give it to a company who then do what you would do in 2 minutes. And I remember standing looking at the show and thinking, well, why would... And I just didn't quite get it. And I think had they probably got into the British psyche a bit more and done a bit more, spent a bit more time just really analysing, is this going to work in this country? Then they'd have probably saved themselves an awful lot of money, because it fell flat on its face and did nothing. So it's understanding the market, isn't it?
What key lessons has Lime Licensing Group learned since 1992 that shape how you help businesses grow through franchising?
The biggest thing, and this is proven to me over and over again, and it has been for several decades now, is that there's no need to try and wing it. There's no point in trying to wing it. If you take the time to really make sure everything is thought through carefully before you launch a franchise system. A bit like building a house, you're not just going to go stick it on your lawn, are you? You're going to put firm foundations down. You're probably going to ask a builder to look at it, and a surveyor, or I don't know, whatever you do to build a house. I've never built one, but I think it's the same with a franchise system. It's probably the same with a business in general, actually. Just take that time and gather up that knowledge that you need and those people around you who can help you. And also, probably true to say as well, the funding that you might need. Take the time to get all that together. And then when you do it, you can just concentrate on the doing, can't you? Because you're doing it from a firm foundation. And I think I'm a real believer in that. And then things get done properly. And it's not like you then start and you're having to look back over your shoulder and think, oh, God, now I need this. Oh, I should have engaged with that supplier. Oh, now I need more money. Do all that at the beginning. Even though it might take you longer, it's not even a step backwards. When you do go, then you're going to be able to go at full tilt. And you've foreseen as much as you can foresee, because you've taken the time to get things right. And I think in franchising, it's particularly important, because when franchisees join, they're often private individuals, not always, but for the most part, they're private individuals. And those people might be putting their life savings down. Well, if you've not seen something or taken the time to get something right before you launch that franchise, that's a very emotive conversation you're going to have with that person, isn't it? So I think that's the biggest thing I would probably say in answer to that. You take your time to get things right, gather everybody up and funding, and then when you go, you're going to do it as well as you could possibly do it then.
That's a common problem that a lot of business owners have, actually, where they're constantly balancing budgets versus right, I can probably do that myself. But then, we all know even the simplest things, they can trick you, you know what I mean? I can have a rinse and repeat formula for what I do, but sometimes oh my God, it's not behaving today, or it's not working. So we all know it's better to hire a professional, someone who's done this all the time, someone who does stuff like this, whether it's like having a website built, you want someone who does it all day, every day, who's been doing it for 10 years. How do you convince people that it's worth putting the money into someone like yourself to help them franchise their business?
Well, I suppose we rely on our reputation a lot now. I think when I first founded the company, it was just me. Now we're the biggest franchise consultancy firm in the UK. Real great specialists behind us, but we're leaving one great brand after another. And it's still a situation for us now that most of our business comes through referral. So, it's a lovely position to be in, but it wasn't like that to start with. But in my own case, I was a franchisor myself before I became a consultant. So I suppose I could say, look at the brand I've just exited. That's done fairly well, and I can teach you to do the same. So I suppose anyone who's going to go into any kind of advisory role or any form of business, if you can take things from your previous experience into what you're doing next, it's probably always a good idea, isn't it? So for us, it's the strength of our brands that we've represented and how well they've done. That's what does it for us. So we've got to keep doing a good job, haven't we? Or we'll run out of steam, won't we?
I couldn't agree more. It's interesting you say referrals are the kind of key source of your business. That's typically what most companies start with, and then that fizzles out and they start, to go on to things like, getting marketing companies or a marketing team within. How did it start? Where did the business come from before?
Well, it was actually our family business. So I was a rep for Rothmans, a cigarette company, when I was literally fresh out of school. It was a great job, loved it to death. But it was I wanted to work for myself, and I joined the family business. And my dad, my stepmom, and me. And it was a greetings card producer, so we published greetings cards supplying local shops. And we ended up franchising it. And over 10 years became quite a rip-roaring success. We also had a confectionery business where we did the same thing too, and a music distribution company doing the sort of CDs that were like $1.99 or $2.99 on little racks in forecourts mainly. And it was really when we sold that I thought, what am I going to do next? And there was a bit of an overlap with the new owners. I had to stay over for the best part of a year actually, but it was really straight out of that experience. I thought, well, that was we made quite a good job of franchising, even though we made every single mistake you could make. And sometimes the same mistake more than once, which is always particularly annoying, isn't it?
Well, you sort of need to do that, don't you? I mean, I do find myself like, well, that's the thing, is it, when they say, insanity is when you keep making the same mistakes or whatever. And that is truly when you have to take a step back and go, right, okay, I see what I want to work, but clearly it's not working. So you're forced to kind of reevaluate what's going on.
No such thing as failure, only learning.
Correct, yeah.
And so I suppose it was because of that experience, really, and it was franchising that made the business really sing and dance. It wasn't actually selling greetings cards. Like the point I made earlier, it was when we launched the franchise that the business really started growing quickly. And so when that was sold, to me, I knew I could teach lots of businesses how to do the same thing. Because the fundamentals of good franchising are shared across every sector and every market. What works well in one business, you can apply the same franchising principles to almost any business, even in a completely different sector, at a completely different price point, maybe even a different country. The fundamentals of good franchising work across all sectors.
Is there a difference between franchising and just one kind of overarching company setting up multiple, say, stores or whatever?
Well, you don't need to do an either or. I mean, a lot of well-known brands have got managed sites run by staff and sites run by franchisees. The fundamental difference always comes down to ownership. A managed site is an employee, so that if, say your example, if you were going to open in Plymouth and you were going to have a member of staff open that, then you're going to pay for all of that setup. This is a lovely studio we're in, and whatever that costs, you would pay for in Plymouth, wouldn't you? And but actually, a franchisee is going to bring in that capital to pay for that themselves, and so franchising is fundamentally different to managed locations in that the franchisee is funding it, but it matters more, doesn't it? Because it's their business. An employee would take any number of jobs, really, wouldn't they? I mean, they might love you, but they would take any number of jobs. But when it comes to franchising, they're likely going to choose one, and they are choosing it, but they take any job.
What common mistakes do you see franchisers make, and how does Lime Licensing Group help clients avoid these?
There's a lot of mistakes. In fact, I've done a number of seminars on the biggest mistakes new franchisors make. But I think a really common one we see, and it's almost unforgivable, really, is not owning your brand. You really should own your brand. Even if you're not a franchisor, you should own your brand. And the only genuine ownership of a brand is a registered trademark. They've got other areas of intellectual property, of course, even like domain names and such like, but really not registering your brand is, it costs 170 quid at the intellectual property office. You could do it yourself in 10 minutes, own your brand. And in the context of franchising, it's particularly important because if you consider, let's say you're going to sell a franchise to somebody, and now you've entered into a contract and they've paid you for that franchise, and it later transpires that actually you don't own that brand, somebody else does, then you're putting yourself and the franchisee potentially in a litigious position, aren't you?
I've seen this in the music world. There was a band, I can't remember the name, but either way, they'd done pretty well. They were getting like real big, full on record label and everything. And another band came along, and small band from Australia, and they'd used the same name, and they'd done exactly that. They'd sort of registered the name, and it was like, oh wow, this band that they're doing huge tours, all the big festivals and that, they were forced to rebrand because this other band came along like, excuse me, it's almost like they did it to troll them because they were such a small band who probably not even played a local show, but then this other band, they're signed to a label and it caused all sorts of problems.
Goodness, yeah. I mean, trademarks and intellectual property are fraught with problems, but it's not particularly expensive So, almost whatever level of business you are, you've got to be protecting it, haven't you? It's your baby. You've got to look after it, haven't you? And if you own the registered trademark, well, that's it. You own it. But a limited company is not good enough. A domain name's not good enough. You've got to own the trademark.
I assume you own yours.
Of course, yes.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, hang on, I forgot that. No, yes, of course we have, yes.
How do your commitments to ethical conduct and professionalism shape your advice to clients and impact long-term brand success?
It's a good question, and I think franchising it's very contractual. Legally, it's a legal contract, I think despite that, it is a business-to-business contract. It's often two limited companies together, but because in a lot of cases that franchisee is, a member of the public, an individual, just happens to be trading as a limited company, I always think it's a pity when that contract, it becomes front of house, if you know what I mean, where the relationship is run by the contract. And I've seen countless examples where human things happen to people, illness or a marriage splitting up, or I've had franchisees who've died, so should that therefore then be a contractual thing, or is there room for compassion? And I genuinely feel there's always room for compassion, but I know I'm not in the majority in the franchise industry who feel that. Now, I had a story that I've told a few people where it was quite a well-known franchisor that had an office in London, and I was living in West Yorkshire at the time. And I was invited to go down to a board meeting, and they very kindly said, we're going to give you 15 minutes in this board meeting. So I thought, well, they're probably worth going. All right, I'll drive. So I got in my car and set off at like 5:30 in the morning, drove all the way down to London. And I sat in this board meeting, and I got my 15 minutes. So I did my little pitch. And they said, well, absolutely great, love it to death. Would you head up all the comings and goings on franchise resales and terminations and appointments of new franchisees? And I said, yeah, it's fine. I'm well used to doing that. And they said, well, you could start on one immediately, actually, because we've got a problem in Durham, of all places. And the franchisee, we found out, has got terminal cancer. But he's been a bit slack on opening on time, and he's basically not doing a very good job. And I thought, well, that's obviously unsurprising. And I said, so anyway, we're going to go in and change the locks because they own the head lease of the premises. We're going to go in and change the locks, and we're going to terminate the agreement, and you can then sell it as a franchise resale, and we'll put a manager in the meantime. And I remember sitting there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, they're going to do this to this guy. And sometimes you sort of think, what on earth am I doing here? And I sat there.
Say that again.
And I thought,
to what?
I thought, God, this is taking me 5 hours to drive here. And I'd got this A4 folder in front of me, and I just sort of dramatically closed it and said, I don't know how I could possibly work with you guys with that approach. Don't you think he's feeling bad enough already? Why don't you just help him sell it? Give him what support you can, and then he gets some money out. You get a new franchisee. Everything's happy, isn't it? And I think that's rare in the franchise industry, but it's completely possible. You can do that sort of thing. There's room for compassion at a human level, but it's a bit rare in the franchise industry. So I think when we're speaking to our clients and they have whatever issue they have within their network, and there's everything you can imagine in a large group of people, do you always have to revert to, well, would you mind reading page 14, clause 16.13, because you're in breach of that, and therefore there are remedies that we're going to sue you or whatever? Or could you actually just get the kettle on and say, let's just look at what is the end customer, and is that end customer going to get looked after? And if they are, that's great. Now we'll just wind him back. How do we find an exit that suits both parties? Because that person is invested not just in the franchise, but in the hope that it would probably be treated properly. And so I think, although it's easy to say this sort of thing, it's very easy as well actually to do it. You don't have to just view it as a pure contractual relationship.
Well, that does make me think, how blurred are the lines between, obviously, if you're selling a proven formula, you're selling effectively, like you say, a clone of your company. How much say do you have as a franchisor to dictate what the other companies do, that the clones do?
Well, you have a lot, because ultimately the control of standards is governed within the franchise agreement. But I think what I'm saying, that between you, the franchisor, and you, the franchisee, if the customer's being looked after and the customer's encounter with the brand is maintained and still really strong, almost what happens in the background doesn't really matter, does it? You could put the boot in as a franchisor. You could do that, and many do. But actually, you could also find a way out of the agreement for someone who needs to get out of the agreement that doesn't hurt them or bankrupt them. And we do see a fair bit of that in the franchise industry. It's not our style of working, and we've demonstrated that over and over the years. And we've often can find a stress-free route for the franchisor as well, because most franchisors are private businesses. People think of McDonald's and things, but mostly they're private businesses. And litigation is going to keep you awake at night, whichever end of the deal you're on, isn't it? It's going to be a stressful experience, and there's no guarantees either of you will win. But actually, you can find a seamless route to just deal with most things that are looking at the human side of it.
Well, you obviously have a strong emphasis on the kind of ethical approach to franchising. Is that common in your industry?
No.
Not at all. Like percentage-wise, what we're talking?
No, there's some. I don't know what percentage-wise what you're talking. I would think I'm in a small minority,
right?
10% probably at best, who would take that view. But to me, it's the quickest, easiest way of dealing with things.
Couldn't agree more.
But then there you are. That's just me.
We were saying it earlier. I mean, like, not just business, but life's about relationships.
Yeah.
And if you are clearly so cold and calculated, no one's going to want to be anything to do with you.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. You'll have moments where you're not going to take that approach, aren't you? And I will too, of course, but I think, and so will my clients. But you may as well start from there and not make it a default that it's a legal letter, might you? You may as well start from there.
Couldn't agree more. Andy, we'll call it there. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Yeah. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. Again, if you think you'd be a good guest on the show, then please drop me an email at joe@innersound.media. See you in the next episode.